This is the marble bust of Gaius Julius Caesar, carved sometime after his assassination in 44 BCE. Its weathered features still radiating the calculating intelligence that reshaped the ancient world. Those hollow stone eyes once gazed upon the largest empire humanity had ever known, while the mind behind them orchestrated political maneuvers and military campaigns that scholars still study 2 millennia later. Between 144 BCE, Caesar commanded over 400,000 soldiers across multiple continents, conquered territories spanning modern-day France, Belgium, Switzerland, and southern Britain, and amassed personal wealth equivalent to roughly $2.5 billion today. He faced rebellions involving over 1 million Gallic warriors, navigated the treacherous politics of the Roman Senate, where a single misstep meant exile or death, and ultimately crossed a small Italian river that would trigger a civil war determining the fate of the Mediterranean world. Yet for all we know about Caesar's achievements, the precise mechanisms of his leadership genius remain partially hidden, scattered across fragmentary ancient sources and archaeological discoveries that continue emerging from European soil. We are about to trace the evolution of political and military leadership through 4 pivotal moments in Caesar's rise, each revealing increasingly sophisticated strategies that transformed him from an ambitious young Roman into history's most studied commander. How did Caesar inspire absolute loyalty among men who had every reason to betray him? What made his leadership so effective that it survived his own death, influencing military doctrine and political theory into the modern era? How did his enemies adapt to tactics they had never encountered before? And what can contemporary leaders learn from studying the calculated risks and brilliant improvisations of a man who gambled everything on his ability to read human nature and exploit it? These questions become urgent when we realize that Caesar's leadership methods fundamentally changed how power operates in large organizations, whether ancient armies or modern corporations, whether Roman legions or contemporary nation-states. Dr. Mary Beard, professor of classics at Cambridge University and author of SPQR, A History of Ancient Rome, has spent decades examining newly discovered inscriptions and reassessing ancient sources to understand how Caesar's leadership actually functioned at the ground level. Her research into recently excavated military camps across Gaul and analysis of contemporary correspondence reveals that Caesar's genius lay not in grand strategic vision alone, but in his ability to synthesize political manipulation, psychological warfare, and tactical innovation into a coherent system that his rivals simply could not match. At the center of this story stands a man born into privilege but not power, raised in the Subura district of Rome, where political ambition mixed with genuine physical danger. Caesar grew up during the social wars and the dictatorship of Sulla, watching how Roman leaders either adapted to chaos or were destroyed by it. The Republic was already fracturing when he reached adulthood, with traditional institutions proving inadequate for governing territories stretching from Spain to Syria. The Roman world of Caesar's youth operated under unwritten rules that had governed the Mediterranean for centuries. Power flowed through the Senate, a body of former magistrates who expected deference to tradition and gradual advancement through established offices. Military commands were distributed based on seniority and political connections, while provincial governments provided opportunities for wealth accumulation that funded future campaigns. Yet this system was buckling under the weight of constant warfare, massive slave populations, and the logistical impossibility of governing distant territories with communication delays measured in months rather than days. Into this unstable environment stepped a generation of Romans who recognized that traditional methods were failing, but only Caesar would develop the leadership innovations necessary to not merely exploit the chaos, but to transform it into a tool for reshaping civilization itself. His genius would emerge through 4 distinct phases, each building upon lessons learned from previous successes and failures, until he had created leadership methodologies that would influence military and political thought for the next 2,000 years. This is one of the earliest known examples of Caesar's leadership philosophy in action, occurring in 75 BCE when the 25-year-old Roman noble encounters the pirates of Cilicia during a journey to Rhodes. Caesar is traveling to study rhetoric under Apollonius Molon, and Cilician pirates capture his ship near the island of Pharmacusa. These are not desperate criminals, but part of an organized maritime confederation that has effectively controlled eastern Mediterranean shipping for decades, demanding tribute from Rome itself and maintaining fortified bases throughout the Greek islands. The pirates initially demand 20 talents of silver for Caesar's release, roughly equivalent to 100,000 denarii, or about 20 years' salary for a Roman legionnaire. Instead of negotiating or expressing fear, Caesar laughs at what he considers an insult to his dignity. He insists they raise the ransom to 50 talents, effectively doubling their demand while simultaneously asserting his own importance and establishing psychological dominance over his captors. This counterintuitive response reveals the first principle of what would become Caesar's leadership signature, turning apparent weakness into displays of strength through sheer audacity. During his 38 days of captivity, Caesar behaves not as a prisoner, but as a commander temporarily displaced. He jokes with the pirates, calls them his good friends, and when they make too much noise during his afternoon rest, he sends messengers ordering them to be quiet. He composes poetry and speeches, then forces the pirates to listen while he recites, calling them barbarians and illiterates when they fail to appreciate his artistic efforts. Most remarkably, he repeatedly promises that he will return to crucify them all, delivering these threats with such cheerful conviction that the pirates assume he is joking. When the ransom arrives through Caesar's network of political connections across Asia Minor, he secures his release, but immediately begins organizing his revenge. Rather than returning to Rome to pursue legal remedies through official channels, Caesar independently raises a fleet and recruits crews from various Greek cities, promising them shares in the substantial treasure the pirates have accumulated. This demonstrates his early mastery of resource mobilization and his understanding that personal initiative often succeeds where institutional procedures fail. Caesar locates the pirates, still at their base near Pharmacusa, just as he had predicted they would be. His improvised fleet captures most of the Confederation intact, along with their ships and accumulated plunder. True to his promise, Caesar has the captured pirates crucified, though he shows what he considers mercy by having their throats cut before the crucifixion begins, sparing them the prolonged agony of death by exposure. The pirate incident establishes several elements that will characterize Caesar's mature leadership style, his ability to maintain psychological dominance even from positions of apparent weakness, his skill at building personal networks that operate outside formal institutional structures, and his recognition that bold action often proves more effective than following established procedures. Most importantly, it demonstrates his understanding that leadership credibility depends upon making commitments and then fulfilling them exactly as promised, regardless of personal cost or convenience. Decades later, in 59 BCE, Caesar implements these same leadership principles on a vastly larger scale during his consulship and the formation of the First Triumvirate. Rome's political system has become completely deadlocked, with competing factions using constitutional procedures to prevent any meaningful governance. The Senate blocks virtually all significant legislation, while tribunes of the plebs veto anything that threatens established interests. Into this paralysis, Caesar introduces a form of political leadership that bypasses traditional institutions through personal relationships and shared interests, rather than formal authority. The formation of the secret alliance between Caesar, Pompey the Great, and Marcus Licinius Crassus represents a revolution in Roman political methodology. Rather than competing for individual advantage within existing structures, these three men create an informal partnership that pools their distinct resources. Pompey's military reputation and veteran settlements, Crassus's vast financial networks, and Caesar's political cunning and popular support. This arrangement allows them to coordinate their influence in ways that traditional Senate politics cannot counter. Caesar demonstrates his evolved understanding of leadership psychology by recognizing that each partner requires different motivations and management approaches. Pompey, despite his military success, craves public recognition and official validation of his achievements. Caesar arranges for legislation confirming Pompey's eastern settlements and provides the public honors that the Senate has been withholding. Crassus seeks opportunities for military glory to match Pompey's reputation and requires profitable business arrangements for his commercial interests. Caesar promises him the governorship of Syria with its prospects for eastern campaigns, while supporting legislation favorable to tax farming contracts. Most importantly, Caesar structures the alliance so that his partner's success depends upon his continued effectiveness, creating incentives for cooperation rather than competition. When traditional politicians attempt to block his legislative agenda, Caesar simply bypasses the Senate entirely, taking controversial bills directly to the popular assemblies where Pompey's veterans and Crassus's clients can provide decisive votes. The political crisis comes when Caesar's colleague, Marcus Bibulus, and the conservative faction attempt to prevent ratification of the land bill that would settle Pompey's veterans. Rather than accepting defeat through normal political procedures, Caesar takes his case directly to the people in the forum. When Bibulus appears to oppose the bill personally, Caesar's supporters attack him physically, breaking his ceremonial rods of office and dumping a basket of excrement over his head. Bibulus retreats to his house and remains there for the rest of his term, issuing impotent proclamations that Caesar ignores completely. This incident reveals Caesar's sophisticated understanding of political theater and mass psychology. By allowing his opponents to appear weak and ineffective while positioning himself as the champion of popular interests, he creates a narrative where traditional authority seems obsolete and obstructionist. The Roman people begin referring to the consulship as the year of Julius and Caesar, rather than the year of Caesar and Bibulus, effectively erasing his colleague from public consciousness. Caesar secures the governorship of Gaul through similar methods, recognizing that military command provides opportunities for wealth accumulation and glory that domestic politics cannot match. But more importantly, provincial command removes him from daily political combat in Rome, while giving him the resources to maintain his alliance through patronage and shared profits. His partners benefit from his success, while he builds an independent power base that will eventually surpass their own. The triumvirate demonstrates Caesar's mature recognition that effective leadership often requires working outside formal structures while maintaining the appearance of constitutional legitimacy. By the end of his consulship, he has established precedents for personal rule that will influence Roman politics for the next century, though few contemporaries fully grasp the implications of his innovations. By 52 BCE, Caesar had become something entirely different from the ambitious politician who had formed the triumvirate just 7 years earlier. The Gallic Wars had transformed him into history's most studied military commander, capable of coordinating multiple legions across vast territories while simultaneously managing complex political relationships in Rome. His leadership methodology had evolved into a sophisticated system combining strategic innovation, psychological manipulation, and personal charisma that his enemies found impossible to counter effectively. The Siege of Alesia represents the pinnacle of Caesar's military genius, a campaign that required him to solve seemingly impossible logistical and tactical problems while maintaining the loyalty of troops facing potential annihilation. Vercingetorix, the charismatic young Gallic chieftain, has united virtually every tribe in central Gaul against Roman occupation. creating an enemy coalition numbering over 250,000 warriors. Rather than attempting to defeat this massive force in open battle, Vercingetorix retreats to the hilltop fortress of Alesia with 80,000 of his best troops, calculating that Caesar cannot sustain a siege with winter approaching and hostile territory surrounding his army. Caesar's response demonstrates leadership thinking that operates several moves ahead of his opponents. Rather than accepting the tactical disadvantage of besieging a fortified position, he transforms the siege into a trap by constructing two separate lines of fortifications. The inner circumvallation surrounds Alesia itself, preventing the defenders from escaping, while the outer contravallation faces outward to protect Caesar's army from the relief force that Vercingetorix's allies are assembling throughout Gaul. This double wall system requires his 8 legions to construct over 20 miles of elaborate fortifications in just 3 weeks, including wooden palisades, earthwork ramparts, sharpened stake obstacles, concealed pit traps, and interconnected camps for 50,000 Roman soldiers. The engineering feat demonstrates Caesar's ability to inspire extraordinary effort from troops who understand that their survival depends upon completing impossible tasks under extreme time pressure. When the Gallic relief army arrives with over 160,000 warriors, Caesar finds himself trapped between two enemy forces that together outnumber his troops by more than 4 to 1. Traditional military doctrine would suggest immediate retreat, but Caesar recognizes that his elaborate fortifications have created opportunities for tactical innovation that his enemies cannot anticipate. The climactic battle occurs when Vercingetorix coordinates simultaneous attacks from inside Alesia and the relief army outside, forcing Caesar to defend 2 separate fronts while preventing his forces from being overwhelmed by superior numbers. At the crucial moment, when Roman lines begin wavering under the massive assault, Caesar personally leads a cavalry charge against the rear of the relief army. His scarlet general's cloak visible across the battlefield as he rallies troops who had begun to despair. This dramatic intervention demonstrates the psychological dimensions of Caesar's leadership genius. His soldiers fight with desperate courage, not merely because they fear defeat, but because they trust Caesar's ability to discover solutions to impossible problems. His presence on the battlefield convinces them that victory remains possible even when circumstances appear hopeless. The Gallic relief army disintegrates under the unexpected cavalry attack, while Vercingetorix surrenders to prevent the massacre of his remaining followers. Caesar's victory at Alesia effectively ends organized Gallic resistance while establishing his reputation as a commander capable of achieving miracles through superior leadership and tactical innovation. But the true genius of Alesia lies in Caesar's subsequent treatment of the defeated Gauls. Rather than implementing the mass executions and enslavements that Roman victories typically produced, he offers generous terms to most tribal leaders while incorporating Gallic warriors into his own forces. This magnanimity creates loyalty among former enemies while demonstrating to his Roman troops that following Caesar provides opportunities for advancement that service under other commanders cannot match. The Alesia campaign establishes Caesar as a leader who can coordinate complex operations across multiple domains simultaneously: engineering, logistics, diplomacy, psychology, and battlefield tactics. His success creates a template for military leadership that will influence commanders from Alexander's successors through Napoleon and beyond. The most remarkable example was discovered through Caesar's own writings about crossing the Rubicon River in January 49 BCE, an event that transformed personal ambition into historical inevitability through leadership decisions that continue influencing political theory today. By this point, Caesar's innovations had created a form of authority that transcended traditional Roman categories, combining military excellence, popular appeal, and political cunning into something the Republic's institutions simply could not contain or control. The crisis develops when Caesar's enemies in the Senate, led by Cato the Younger and supported by Pompey, demand that he return to Rome as a private citizen to face prosecution for alleged illegalities during his consulship and Gallic campaigns. This ultimatum forces Caesar to choose between accepting political destruction through hostile courts or using his battle-tested legions to transform Roman governance permanently. Traditional analysis often presents this moment as Caesar's personal decision to prioritize ambition over constitutional law. But the reality reveals far more sophisticated leadership calculations. Caesar recognizes that the Republic's political system has become fundamentally dysfunctional, incapable of governing territories spanning 3 continents or managing the complex economic and social changes that conquest has produced. His choice is not between personal gain and civic duty, but between accepting systemic collapse and providing alternative forms of governance that actually function. Caesar's famous hesitation at the Rubicon demonstrates his understanding that crossing this small river will trigger consequences extending far beyond his personal fate. According to Suetonius, he spends hours walking along the riverbank, weighing options with his closest advisors while his troops wait in formation. The phrase alia acta est, the die is cast, represents not reckless gambling, but calculated acceptance that effective leadership sometimes requires abandoning failed systems to create better alternatives. The subsequent civil war reveals the full evolution of Caesar's leadership methodology. Rather than simply defeating Pompey's forces through superior tactics, Caesar implements a comprehensive strategy for transforming Roman society while the fighting continues. He cancels debts, extends citizenship to Gallic tribes, reforms the calendar, initiates massive public works projects, and establishes policies for governing distant provinces that will remain influential for centuries. Most remarkably, Caesar treats defeated enemies with unprecedented clemency, pardoning political opponents and incorporating their supporters into his own administration. This approach creates loyalty through generosity rather than fear, demonstrating his recognition that sustainable authority requires willing cooperation rather than mere submission. Caesar's clemency toward Marcus Brutus exemplifies this philosophy in action. Despite Brutus's family history of opposition and his participation in anti-Caesarian politics, Caesar promotes him to important magistracies and treats him almost as an adopted son. This magnanimity reflects Caesar's confidence that effective leadership can transform enemies into allies through demonstrated competence and genuine concern for their welfare. The crossing of the Rubicon establishes precedents for crisis leadership that extend far beyond ancient history. When established institutions prove inadequate for contemporary challenges, Caesar's example suggests that effective leaders must be willing to transcend traditional boundaries while accepting personal responsibility for the consequences of their innovations. His assassination in 44 BCE paradoxically confirms the effectiveness of his leadership methods. As the conspirators discover that killing Caesar does not restore the republic they hope to preserve. Instead, his political and military innovations continue evolving through his heir Octavian, who completes the transformation of Rome into an empire using refined versions of Caesar's own techniques. The remarkable pattern emerging across these 4 examples reveals leadership principles that transcend their historical context, while providing insights for contemporary organizational challenges. Caesar's genius lay not in any single tactical innovation or political maneuver, but in his systematic approach to understanding how human psychology, institutional structures, and changing circumstances interact to create opportunities for transformational leadership. Each phase demonstrates increasing sophistication in Caesar's methods. From the intuitive audacity of his youth, through the complex alliance building of his political maturity, to the military innovations of the Gallic campaigns, and finally, the constitutional revolution of crossing the Rubicon. Yet underlying this evolution runs a consistent recognition that effective leadership requires adapting proven principles to new circumstances rather than merely repeating successful formulas. Caesar understood that traditional authority derives from institutional position, but transformational authority emerges from demonstrated competence and genuine concern for followers' welfare. His troops fought with extraordinary courage, not because military discipline compelled them, but because they trusted his ability to lead them to victory and share the benefits of success. His political allies remained loyal because partnership with Caesar provided opportunities for advancement that independent action could not match. Perhaps most importantly, Caesar recognized that sustainable leadership requires building systems that survive the leader's own limitations or absence. His reforms in law, governance, military organization, and public policy continued evolving long after his death, influencing Roman civilization for centuries and providing models for subsequent leaders facing similar challenges. The enduring relevance of Caesar's leadership methods becomes apparent when we consider contemporary parallels in business, politics, and organizational management. Modern leaders attempting to drive change through traditional institutional channels often encounter the same resistance that Caesar faced in the Roman Senate. His example suggests that transformational leadership sometimes requires working outside established structures while maintaining legitimate authority through superior performance and genuine service to constituency interests. Caesar's approach to crisis management offers particularly relevant insights for leaders navigating unprecedented challenges where traditional solutions prove inadequate. His willingness to accept personal responsibility for risky decisions, combined with his systematic approach to understanding complex stakeholder relationships, provides a template for leadership in environments where the costs of inaction exceed the risks of bold innovation. Current archaeological discoveries continue revealing new evidence about Caesar's methods, from recently excavated military camps in Gaul that show how he organized supply lines across vast distances to inscriptions in Rome that illuminate his administrative reforms. Digital analysis of ancient correspondence is uncovering previously unknown details about his political networks and decision-making processes. These ongoing discoveries suggest that our understanding of Caesar's leadership genius remains incomplete, with significant insights yet to emerge from sources that historians are still learning to interpret. The full extent of his influence on subsequent military doctrine, political theory, and organizational management may not be apparent for generations, as scholars continue developing methodologies for analyzing leadership effectiveness across historical periods. What seems certain is that Caesar created leadership innovations that proved so effective they fundamentally altered human expectations about what individual leaders can accomplish under extreme circumstances. His example continues challenging contemporary assumptions about the relationship between personal ambition and public service, the balance between institutional stability and necessary change, and the responsibilities that transformational leadership places upon those bold enough to attempt it.